Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. I'm your host, Jason Johnston Yellen, aka the Whiskey Wizard. And as Joshua likes to say in the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast, I'm joined as always, by Joshua Hatton, aka the Whiskey Cherub.
It's really lovely to be here, Jason. It really is.
In Extra Extra, one of us brings a news story to the attention. Should I say it's lovely to have you, or was that redundant?
You know what? Let's just move on. Apparently, it's not lovely enough to have me. So,
in each episode of Extra Extra, one of us brings a whiskey news story to the attention of the other. We read it for the first half of the episode, we riff on it for the second half, and we try to get out of here in a tight 30, sometimes 35, or like the last episode, a tight 49. Sometimes we like to include both tracks where each of us speaks. And sometimes we just throw in the odd floor cuttings and just let it sit however it sits.
you know, we only have so much time in this episode, Jason, so let's try to just keep it short, right? Because we're doing things a little different with this episode, right? So,
if you, dear listener, got a faulty version of the last episode of Extra Extra, please go back, please re-download. The correct version is there. And I think you were saying in One Nation Under Whiskey, Joshua, listeners can look for V 2.0.
correct. So it will say Season 2, Episode 7, V 2.0. Correct.
Lovely. So we got a lot of good feedback. We got such good feedback from the last episode of Extra Extra. We went ahead and really dedicated an entire One Nation Under Whiskey to our own response to it.
Yeah.
So good whiskey should promote good conversation. And I think the last episode of Extra Extra and the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey did exactly that. Speaking of, what are we conversing about today, Joshua? It's your turn to bring the news to my and our attention.
Well, as I mentioned previously, we are doing this episode slightly differently, only because what I found, well, first off, there's not a ton happening in the news, like huge stories.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of stories that have a bit of weight to them, and I think that there is a bit of a connection to them as well. So I thought what we might do is bring one story to the listeners in the first half, have a little riff, then into the second half of the episode, bring in the second story, have a second little riff on that, and see if I am correct in that there is a connection between these two stories, as tenuous as it may be.
Yeah, I'm ready to see this. I will say, just as you say, there is no big news at this time of year, and I do agree with you. I did think the news of Georgie Crawford leaving the new Port Ellen project to join Sukhinder Singh and Elixir Distillers' Isla Distillery project was pretty stonking big news.
Yes, that is true.
However, perhaps we'll have an opportunity to unpack that in a future One Nation Under Whiskey rather than an Extra Extra.
Oh, you're so good at teasing. So, the other thing is I wanted to put a little focus on American spirits, because we really don't focus on American spirits much. It just tends to be that other category.
American spirits!
Stay away from me. So, the first
American spirits!
The first one is, and I'm not going to lie, right? Both of them are, I'm not bringing great news to you or to our listeners.
Thank you.
So the first story was released March 31st of this year, so it happened a few weeks ago, but the news hasn't changed. And this is in the spirits business, an article written by Nicola Carruthers, who we've read from before. The headline reads, U.S. craft distillers' sales halved in 2020. And the subheader reads, craft distillers...
Did something happen in 2020?
What's that?
Something happened in 2020?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, it seemed like,
Maybe we'll learn.
business
Maybe
as
we'll learn
usual.
more about it in the story.
Yeah, maybe. So the subheader reads, Craft distillers in the U.S. saw revenue drop by 55% in 2020 after tasting rooms were closed due to the pandemic, according to a new survey. And we definitely know that this was something that was crushing distilleries. And our friends, Scott and Becky Harris at Catoctin Creek were really hit hard until, thankfully, the state of Virginia allowed them a new license to be able to sell and ship from their location. So anyway, I'm getting on a bit of a tangent. Let's go into the story.
For the benefit of our listeners, I'm sitting here quietly nodding my head to everything you just said.
It's amazing
Please
you
continue.
being quiet. The survey by the American Distilling Institute, a.k.a. the ADI, and I'll keep on referring to them as the ADI here on out, was conducted in January 2021 and included feedback from 269 distilleries across 42 states and the District of Columbia. The ADI survey of its members found that 36% reported revenues were down by more than a quarter. The declining sales were due to the fall in on-site revenue after many distilleries were forced to close their tasting rooms in 2020. Furthermore, 61% said the revenues through online sales were down. ADI President Eric Owens said, quote, "Craft distillers rely so heavily on tours, tasting rooms, and local bars and restaurants, and all of those sales opportunities were lost for many months." He continues, "Consumers wanted to get the support of their local distillers, and one way they did that was to buy a bottle of spirits to have it shipped to them, often along with hand sanitizer made by the distillery." And now this second half of the article has a subheader, and it's just a quick line that says DTC, quote, saving grace. So DTC stands for direct to consumer. So DTC shipping has been a critical revenue stream for distillers during COVID-19, the ADI said. 6 states have passed DTC measures to permit craft distilleries to ship their products to consumers. Those who were able to use DTC shipping, that is not easy to say, DTC, toy boat, okay, said the revenue stream generated an average of 39% of their total sales, with an overwhelming amount of customers from their local state. In the states, and here's a quote from Owens, "In the states where direct-to-consumer shipping of spirits is allowed, craft distillers report that it has been a saving grace and a significant source of much-needed revenue." Owens continues, "The pandemic has completely changed the way consumers shop. To be successful moving forward, distillers must have the freedom and flexibility to ship their spirits, if that is how their consumers want to purchase and receive them." He continues, "Distillers are urging their state lawmakers to pass laws allowing direct-to-consumer shipping of spirits permanently to meet this new consumer expectation and to compete in this rapidly changing marketplace." I have something I want to say about that, so remind me to talk about DTC. In addition, 78% of craft distillers report that 3/4 or more of their sales were to in-state consumers. Nearly 69% of craft distillers claimed their wholesaler does not provide brands with the necessary time and attention. Meanwhile, 42% reported that it was difficult to find a wholesaler in their state. And then this is the final sentence here. The survey found that 62% of craft distillers who sell their products out of their home state said it was difficult to find a wholesaler, and 77% said their out-of-state wholesaler does not give the brands the proper amount of attention. Scene.
So before we go too far into this, let's pivot back to what you wanted to say about DTC.
You know, I think there's a lot of American distillers that are quite jealous of the American wine industry, where you could be a vineyard, you could be a winemaker, and you can sell right out of the winery. You can ship out of the winery, usually to in-state, but I think some wineries, depending on the state, will allow to ship into multiple states. And I never understood why the delineation between a fermented product, wine, versus a distilled product, spirits. And I think that breweries enjoy the same thing that wine does, where you can buy there and they can ship locally. I could be wrong there, but I think in some states that's allowed. I don't.
As you were bringing it up about breweries, I was trying to think myself there, and gosh,
yeah, maybe we shouldn't speculate too much there. We do know for certain that wine has been allowed to do that for quite a while, and it's been a boon for them, right? That's fantastic. There's so many great wineries, vineyards that are producing product, and like they had said, what Nicola had reported here, where you have these distillers that feel they're not getting the attention that they need from their distributors to make any dent within new markets. And so what do you do when you're dealing with a distributor that, not to fault them, but distribution houses tend to have pretty wide portfolios and smaller, more efficient teams that they can't sell all the things all the time, right?
Correct.
And it's the big movers, right? Is a consumer going to buy a Rittenhouse rye over a Catoctin Creek rye, right? What's easier to sell? And that's the situation that I think a lot of these smaller producers run into. And boy, how helpful it would be to them to be given this DTC right to ship directly to the consumer, even if it's within the state, right? That the state will still be able to collect the taxes it needs, but now the distillery has the opportunity to make the sales that it was simply losing out on.
Well, and it's interesting because if you look at what happened in 2020 with the closing of tasting rooms, a craft distiller's business is DTC.
Yeah.
It's in-person DTC.
Yeah.
If you take away the tasting room, if you take away the tours and you take away the DTC, we were lucky, and I know distillers put in a lot of hard work on this in the state of Virginia to have the shipping become the version of DTC that allowed them to continue to make money. It's interesting that other states, as you say, even just to ship within state boundaries isn't always allowed. Like that's mental. That's absolutely crazy. I would love to further that conversation and get on to shipping across state boundaries. But that's clearly a conversation for another day if we're busy trying to allow shipping within state boundaries.
Well, right, and this is simply the issue, is the U.S. is set up, our listeners in Australia and the U.K. and various European countries may hear this and say, God, why is it so goddamn difficult in the U.S.? And the reason it's so difficult is we have two systems. We have our federal system, which you would think would be the overarching, if the federal government says you could do A, B, and C, you would think everybody has to comply to that. And the fact of the matter is, no, we are a states' rights nation. That's why there are certain states where cannabis is legal, even though federally speaking, it's illegal. But certain states do allow legal cannabis sales. And so it's just sort of the opposite with whiskey now, right? You have the federal government that doesn't really have too much of an issue, writ large, but allows the states to make their own governing decisions on these products.
Before we get out of this story and pivot to the next, when you saw that number, this loss of really half their revenue, what did you think when you saw that number?
That there is going to be a lot of copper available on the market. Is it going to be recycled? Is it going to be repurposed? This is people. This is families, and this is small American business that, just simply due to laws that were likely written back in the 30s, are being negatively affected because things change, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, laws are not evolving the way our modern society and consuming habits have evolved.
Yep.
Yeah. And you?
My mind went towards how important that foot traffic is. And I've been saying it about beer for a long time, is if you open a new brewery today, plan on being local. Plan on really winning over your county and then stretch beyond that. But imagine you'll see great success within your own state, but don't go looking across boundaries. And to hear this about tasting rooms and tours speaks to craft distilling really having a very similar model. Then hearing we can't really get wholesalers to pay attention to us. We can't really get wholesalers to represent us. We have to put the power back into the hands of the distillery owners. And yes, you could try to become a big deal within your own state and then maybe look at neighbouring states. It's going to be hard to take on the entire US. And then, and I do this professionally as I set you up for the next story, Joshua, it's very difficult to send overseas and build your reputation overseas. That's already difficult. Having punitive tariffs on top of that makes it even more so. With that said, what's our next story, Joshua?
I'll tell you as soon as this little musical interlude is done. So our next story I found in the New York Post, and like the other one I read, this one's from late March. It's from March 20th.
I don't even trust the date in the New York Post.
Yeah, I don't often seek out stories from the New York.
It's a daily for you. You get it delivered to your doorstep in Connecticut. Your butler irons it and then presents it to you with the morning tea.
Yeah. So this article is written by one Lisa Fickenshire, and the headline reads, U.S. whiskey makers about to get soaked by higher tariffs. I know we love talking about tariffs, but I think that there is a bit of a connection here, and it helps.
I didn't even notice the tariffs. I was so distracted by that absolutely horrific headline.
This is the problem with the New York Post. However, the only reason why I stuck with this, Jason, is that our friends Scott and Becky Harris are in this article, and they're pictured in this article. Okay.
Oh, you have me. You have my attention again.
This is a slightly longer article. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to read the parts that I think make the most sense to what's in discussion here. And so Lisa Fickenshire starts it off saying, former President Trump's lingering trade wars are about to soak American whiskey makers, even as the rest of the U.S. booze industry, celebrates a recent lifting of tariffs on wine, vodka, and rum. Major U.S. whiskey brands, from Woodford Reserve to Jim Beam and Maker's Mark, have been on the rocks since... Look at that.
Here's the good news.
Yeah,
her use of rocks makes much more sense than her use of soaked.
I know.
Soaked makes no sense here. Rocks at least make sense. Please continue.
Yeah. Right, so they've been on the rocks since 2018 over massive 25% tariffs imposed on their sales to Europe and to the United Kingdom, thanks to a Trump-era war on steel and aluminum imports. Now, even as the Biden administration works to rebuild U.S. trade relations with Europe and the UK, tariffs on U.S. whiskeys are poised to double on June 1 to 50%.
That's terrible news. Terrible. June 1, gosh.
June 1, yep. That's Heida's birthday. Look at that. Happy birthday, Europe.
Mazel.
Distillers say that their sales to Europe, a key market for whiskey, will be, you're going to love this. You're going to love this, Jason, will be put on ice indefinitely if that happens. I tell you, Lisa's got away with words. I'm loving this. This is like the dad jokes of journalism. It's just pun after pun. I'm enjoying this, and I hope you and the listeners are too.
There's a poster in a current commercial that says, "Dad jokes are no joke."
Dad jokes is true. It's serious business. I'll just go on a little further. A 50% tariff would make us so uncompetitive with a $30 bottle in the U.S. costing 60 euros that I won't be able to ship product to Europe anymore, says Michael Langen, the general manager of Yellow Rose Distilling of Houston. Yellow Rose's shipments to Europe fell by 5-fold to just 1,000 cases last year as a result of the tariffs, Langen said. If the 50% tariffs kick in, his U.S. imports to Europe will fall to 0, he said, and bouncing back will be tough. Just read just a little bit more. And this is a quote from Langen. American whiskey is losing market share and shelf space in Europe to competitors from Japan and Asia who are taking our place. And that was him lamenting. U.S. whiskey exports to Europe were on the rise before the tariffs went into effect, up 28% for the first 6 months of 2018, according to the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, a.k.a. DISCUS. Since then, however, U.S. whiskey exports have fallen by 37% to Europe and by 53% to the U.K., a trade group said. Among those suffering are Brown-Forman, the makers of Jack Daniels, which has been absorbing much of the added cost in an effort to not lose market share, suffering profit margin declines in the process. But even a company like Brown-Forman, which also makes Woodford Reserve and Finlandia vodka, finds the impending 50% tariff hard to swallow. At a tariff rate of 25%, we decided to shield our European customers whenever possible, Chief Executive Lawson Whiting told Politico on March 11. Everyone can imagine that at a rate of 50%, suddenly that shielding becomes much more difficult. Brown-Forman is headquartered in Kentucky, the birthplace of bourbon, a type of whiskey that relies heavily on corn for its distinctive sweet flavor. Kentucky is also the home state of noted Trump ally Senator Mitch McConnell, which is a big reason the whiskey industry was targeted by the European trade representatives in the first place, experts said. The Trump administration took a very aggressive posture with the EU, and as a result, that contributed to the EU being very targeted at the time on where to apply pressure points. Chris Swanger, chief executive of the Distilled Spirits Council, told the Post. There's a lot of whiskey made in Kentucky. It's not just Kentucky that's suffering, however. There are 37 states that export whiskeys overseas, and distillers from Virginia to New York say they are feeling the pain. That's where I'll end it. There's quite a bit more. If anybody's interested in reading the rest of this article, again, it's in the New York Post, and it was written by Lisa Fickenshire on March 28th, 2021.
You mentioned at opening that our good friends Scott and Becky are pictured in that article.
Yeah.
Are they also quoted in there?
You know what they are? Hold on once. Yeah, here it is. It's just a short...
Give me that piece.
Yeah, it's just a short bit. It says and there's an opening sentence that leads into it, so let me read that.
Okay.
The tariffs have also poured cold water Oh, look at your face. I knew you'd love that. Cold water on exports at Catoctin Creek Distilling, a Purcellville, Virginia distillery whose internationally recognized hooch is sold at Manhattan's popular Astor Wine and Spirits. Catoctin Creek's whiskeys currently generate about $10,000 in sales from Europe versus several million in sales prior to the tariff. Quote, "We had predicted that our overseas sales would double in 2018 to 22%, said Scott Harris, Catoctin Creek's founder. And he told the Post, but now it's at about 0.5%.
Good grief.
Yeah.
So when you just quoted a moment ago 10,000 being down from millions, that was just European business, just European exports, or global exports for them?
No, that's how I read it. It says, in sales from Europe.
Okay. So they're currently at 10,000 after being at millions.
After it being millions. Yep. Yep.
Good grief.
Yep. That's scary.
That's, what did you say in the first half? That's people. That's families. That's businesses, obviously. Just...
Right, and you know, here's the thing. Listen, I'm not about to defend Europe, but you understand how these things happen. There was this out of the blue tariff on steel to Europe. That really took some of our strongest allies by surprise, and it just became this silly tit for tat thing. And that's dangerous, right? That's really dangerous, not just for American producers, but, you know, on the European side, right? The steel producers, that's family. Those are people, right? And it's, we've said it many times, tariffs are never good. They don't help people. Think about what tariffs are doing globally. Right now, there is currently a global shipping container shortage, which is tied to a few things. One of them being a 250-ish% tariff onto Chinese goods from the U.S. If the Chinese can't ship their product over to the U.S. because there are tariffs in place, well, those containers are going to stay. They're not going to be out there to be reused and reused and reused, right? This is a huge, huge problem that has more effect than I think we fully understood when these decisions were made to apply these tariffs.
Yeah, and the fact that tariff decisions were made pre-coronavirus, right? What a double whammy for Scott and Becky to deal with as one data point among thousands.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like, as you're busy trying to deal with, what does this mean for our projections on exports to Europe because of retaliatory tariffs? And then you say, oh crap, our tasting room is shutting down. Our foot traffic is going away. That is nightmarish, absolutely nightmarish. And here we are, still sitting with consequences from coronavirus. And here we are still sitting with just an absolute crisis in tariffs. And here we are watching the clock again. Christ, we were just here 4 or 5 months ago talking about the countdown to December 31 with the FET, you know?
Yeah.
And what would that look like? What a year. What a 12, 13 months it's been for producers in America.
Yeah, well, let's look at it this way, and I don't think that this is the proper way to look at it, but, you know, in earlier March, when we had heard that discussions around the lifting of the 25% tariffs on Scotch whiskey into the U.S. would be punted down to August, the Biden administration pulled a rabbit out of their hat and were able to get a lifting of those tariffs, at least on a temporary basis of 4 months. So who knows, who knows what agreement we might be able to come to between the U.S. and our partner European Union countries to maybe get them to lift it in that 12th hour.
Well, and if anything's going to get the attention of Minority Senate Leader, it's going to be something this significant impacting his home state.
Only time will tell, Jason.
Gosh, so interesting to be sitting clock watching again.
I'm tired of it. Fucking hell.
And for our own plans as well. What does it mean for us sending US sourced product under the Single Cask Nation
I'll tell
label?
you exactly what it does to us. It puts a halt on all of the plans that we had or planned to have until we see this go away.
Is this affecting American single malts going overseas, or is it just American bourbons?
That's my understanding, is that it's American spirits, right? So rum, bourbon, rye, single malt, brandy. Yeah.
50%. Gosh. Okay. Well, there's a couple of pieces there. We're definitely revisiting themes that have been with us for over a year now, and now we're starting to see the repercussions. That's why I asked you to revisit those kind of fiscal statements coming in. That's why we're looking at this 50 or 55% revenue loss in 2020.
55%.
55% revenue loss. Like, we're starting to see. Do you have this expression over here, the chickens coming home to roost?
We do. Yeah, we do.
There you go. You have rural communities in America. And so that's what we're seeing. These chickens are coming home to roost, where shit that hit the fan in 2020 had repercussions, as we knew they would. Now we're seeing the extent of those repercussions. And we can clearly see, if we don't get direct-to-consumer shipping, if we don't get relief on tariffs, there are going to be continued repercussions that are going to continue to impact distillers, producers who are clearly on their knees currently.
The last thing I'll say, think about how an increased tariff on American whiskeys, especially the larger brands, could affect some Scottish bottlers. We know for a fact that there is bourbon being bottled in Scotland for the European market. What is that going to do to some larger producers, larger bourbon producers that are sending the bulk spirit over to Scotland to be bottled there, to be sold within, European countries? That's going to affect the Scottish business.
There's also a particular style of cask used in maturation. What do you do when you reduce your volumes of distillation and you reduce your volumes of maturation? You have fewer ex-bourbon casks going to Scotland for maturation.
If we keep going this way, right?
And that's exactly my point, right? Repercussions.
Yeah.
There are always unintended consequences.
Always.
What's the best line? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Here we are.
That's a perfect way to end this, I think.
There you go. If you have any interest in reaching us, drop us an email, questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. No E in whiskey.
Never.
Other than that, we'll get out of here. We'll try and keep this to a tight edit in post in the hands of the Whiskey Cherub. Until next time, keep supporting your American producers as best you can. Go looking for them. Help them out. Gosh, do they need it?
They do.
Cheers, Joshua.
Cheers, Jason.
Cheers, dear listeners. We're out of here. Bong.